So this is the screen you get after you log into the router. On top, system summary, you see serial number of the units. Here you see the product ID. I have a RV042 version 3. Firmware version, you can see it was updated a bit more than 1 year ago. Checksum, if you download it from the internet and you want to check if it's the real file that hasn't been modified. Working mode, you cannot modify this here, but this router works as a gateway or as a plain router. You can choose how it works. Here is the IP address that you have. If you have IPv6 enabled, you're going to see the information here. And the uptime. You can see here that the time is really low. I already had 300 or 400 days on this. Thing is that I updated the firmware last week, or 2 weeks ago, so I have here 13 days. And a problem with this device. Every time you restart it, unless you go to the NTP settings and re-enable it, it's not gonna get the correct time from the internet, even though it's enabled there. Now here's a setup wizard. If you really don't know what you're doing and you just need to quickly have internet access working, you would run that. I don't see much sense in this because, well, if you're running the wizard, you're not going to be using most of the functionality of this device, and you could get by with a much cheaper and simpler device. Here is the mislabeled port statistics. That's more port status. You can actually click it. Okay. So it shows the status of the LAN ports here on the left side, and on the right the status of the WAN ports. If we click here, yeah, so basically the kind of interface, if it's up, and byte counts in a very unreadable form. I wonder how much it was when I left the router up for a year. If we go down, then we have the IP addresses of your interfaces. I have only the first interface here enabled. Firewall settings. Well, I'm running the firewall full power. And remote management is off, meaning that I cannot log in to this router through the WAN interface, only through LAN connections. I have 4 access rules set. I'm using 0 tunnels for some reason. This is wrong, probably. And I have 50 available tunnels. This device can manage 50 tunnels. I have a syslog server enabled, and I also email log is enabled. So in case of issues, I'm gonna get an email with the problem, a summary of the problem. If you go to setup, you have here the basic configuration to get your network running. Here you can choose the host name and domain name. You're gonna follow the same guidelines as I'm following, as I described a few episodes ago. Here you can choose whether you're running IPv4 only or dual stack IPv4 and v6. I tried to run it dual stack for a while, but I had problems. You know, my devices didn't know that my provider was not resolving IPv6 correctly, so I was having weird issues, and switching to IPv4 resolved it. Down here you have the MAC address of the IPv4 interface. That's quite funny how it is described here. You can choose the IP address that you want, subnet mask, and you can have a router, the single router / gateway serving multiple subnets. You can enable this here if you are interested. In WAN settings, go down. Here you can choose the configuration for your provider. In my case, I disable all wireless access points and routing features of my supplied modem, or the modem supplied by my provider, and I get all the connection and routing managed by the RV042. If you click here, then you can enter the information for your provider. Remember before I was showing the DMZ thing? So that's where you would enable it. The next screen is password. Password is easy, yeah? You have your username and you can set up your password and have it expiring after some period of time. I really recommend this feature. It forces you to be more careful with your own security. Time. Time is where you naturally set up your time settings. The first option here, the radio button, configures your router to use time from the internet provided by a network time protocol server. You can also, of course, configure the time manually. The time zone is a very important and often overseen setting. Each device from each manufacturer is gonna have it set to a default. For example, I know companies from the Silicon Valley may set it up to Pacific time, and some will have London but not UTC. Some will come in Chinese time or Japanese time. So here, since chances are high that you have devices in different time zones, you will enable it to use GMT0 or UTC and disable daylight savings time. So if something wrong happens, you can easily compare the log files and find out the matching events. Otherwise, you will take a long time until you figure out what happened when before you can troubleshoot. In case you go for manual time or daylight savings time, you can enter the start and the end period of the summertime. And here on the bottom, you can set up the NTP server, and I use just the standard one that came from the factory. DMZ host. Even if you have the DMZ mode disabled in the network page, you can still use or set one of your devices to be a DMZ host. That means the RV042 firewall is not going to touch the traffic destined to that address. Actually, no. Here, if you set up this IP, every untagged traffic, incoming traffic, will be sent to the specific internal IP that you set. So for example, if you have a server, you can easily point all the traffic to reach that server. But of course, you need to remember that now there's no firewall. Your device is totally exposed to the internet and you need to configure its internal firewall properly. I've used this feature for a while, but now I'm really using port forwarding to count on the RV042 firewall, and in addition configuring the destination device's firewall properly as well. We are gonna go through that in the next episodes. Port forwarding. Here you can set specific destinations in your network for different services. The service list comes pre-populated with the most common service types, but you can also add your own. For example, here I added transmission and open up ports for torrent. Also here on the bottom you see that I'm running a dedicated Civilization 5 server, and I open the port ranges down here. So then you can choose an IP address, enable the rule, and choose what service you are running there. If you go down, you can set a port range that then will trigger forwarding for you. I've never used that feature and I don't really see much point in it, but some of you may find it useful. UPnP, Universal Plug and Play, is a feature that allows specific applications to talk directly to the router and ask it to open ports for you and forward the traffic. So for example here, you can see I run Skype from different internal hosts, and they dynamically ask the router to open some ports for me. This feature can be tricky in terms of security, and there are known bugs in firmware of old routers. Not specifically the RV042, but from different brands. So you should be careful when you enable it and check the documentation and run some penetration tests to ensure you are safe. And again, you can do some... No, this is a list, and you can enable or disable it, probably based on some history. If you click fill, you get a quick table. Easy. One-to-one net. To be honest, I've never used that. Aha! So for example, my provider, if you pay some extra money, my provider can give me, for example, 5 private IPs, and I could map the IPs to specific internal hosts if I wanted. Is that so? Let's check the help. Yep. So this process creates a relationship that maps a valid external IP address to an internal address that's hidden by net. Actually very cool. Disabling it by now, for now. MAC address clone. Some people may need to set up a specific MAC address or clone the MAC address from a different network interface to deal with some connectivity issue or firewalls or whatever have you. So if you need this feature, you're gonna know what it is about. Dynamic DNS allows you to hire a service that will give you a host name, for example, yourdomain.com, and reassign or rematch the name and your external IP address. This would be a very useful feature for me, but unfortunately, the RV042 only supports DIN DNS and 3322.org, and I use NoIP for many years and I'm really happy with the service. But for you it may be useful. Advanced routing lets you change some advanced configuration for routing, obviously, on the RV042. For example, you can choose between gateway and router. If the RV042 is your main point of connectivity to the internet, it is a gateway. But if you only use it to interconnect two networks, it's a router. Well, if for example you have a gigabit link and you are running a 10 megabit RV042, you may want it to be a router and be behind the network and not really be a bottleneck for your network, for example. RIP, rest in peace, I think it's router interchange protocol, something about routers talking to each other. Let me see. Routing information protocol. Aha, so if you have many routers in a quite large network, then our IP can get a bus path for your connection. It's not necessary for our design, it's very small, but if you really go all in and get 30-40 locations and you're counting on this cheap equipment for that, then you may want to use this option to improve your performance. Down here you can set up a static route. If you have any IP and a specific mask, you can force the traffic to go through a gateway and count the maximum number of hops here and choose the interface for it. Again, if you need this kind of feature, you will know it. IPv6 transition. This screen here enables you to use 624 tunnels if you're running IPv6. So basically it's legacy support for IPv4 devices when you are running an IPv6 network. It's not really necessary for on dual stack or IPv4 only. It's a very good option for the future actually. If you really go full IPv6 and have some old machine or old device, this can help. Now we have the DHCP. Here is a basic DHCP configuration. So if you need to work as a DHCP server, you enable that. But for example, if you have a Windows server or a Linux server that is assigning IPs for you, then you don't enable that. DHCP relay, I think it configures the RV042 to forward the DHCP requests and responses to the destination server. I'm not really sure how it works. Yeah, that's probably that, because if you enable, it disables the DHCP server, the internal DHCP server. Let's see that. Yes, so if you have another DHCP server, the relay allows the router to communicate the client's request to the server and then the answer back. Down here, you choose the lease time, so how often clients are gonna go and ask for new IPs. Here I have 1440 minutes, that's the default, and I keep it like this. And the range, 100 IPs from my home, I'm using probably 40 or 50, it's good enough. Down here you can assign static entries. I'm gonna go through this deeply when we start deploying servers, but basically it's recommendable to have a server always getting the same IP address no matter what, and you can enter the IP addresses here. A cool thing that I do is, if I want to reserve IP ranges, I can just enter a fake MAC address and reserve it, so later on when I expand my network, I'm sure this IP address is free. So at the moment, nothing in my network gets 192.168.40.104. This is gonna come later for, I think, I have notes somewhere, a syslog server. Down here, you can block MAC addresses that have wrong IP addresses, or block MAC addresses that are not on the list. That's if you really want to avoid any unauthorized device to come in. So basically it turns DHCP in your network into a whitelist. Only allowed devices can connect. What I did for a while here was I had a flatmate that really used a lot of bandwidth, so I configured QoS on her IP and I added her device here. Down here you have DNS configuration. Here you can configure a proxy. So the RV042 will answer requests that it knows about, but relay other requests if necessary. This option is new after some firmware upgrade. Maybe the help has been completed. Probably not. Yeah, they never updated the help. Alright. Or you can use the DNS on ISP. It just tells all clients' devices to get the IPs from there. Or you can use the below, and that's the case. I have Windows DNS configured. Don't worry, we are gonna try Linux servers as well. So 2 Windows boxes providing DNS if required. So if one has to restart, the second one takes over. If you are using Wins for something legacy, you can configure it here. And down here, you have your internal DNS database. You can configure the router to take over and answer DNS requests in case the servers you specified above are not available. So if I have no DNS and I'm looking for something, it goes here. It's very useful in case your DNS server is down on maintenance. Filling this table is going to be part of our server deployment process. The next screen is DHCP status. On the left side, you see the IP of the server, the number of IPs dynamically assigned by the router to clients, the number of IPs that clients requested from the table. So when the client sent a request for an IP, the router looked up into the table and found a match. Down here, the number of IPs in the range is still available, so I have 76, and the total. That's the IP of the router plus the IP of the range from 100 to 200, the number of IPs in that range. On the right hand side, if I had IPv6 enabled, I would see IPv6 information. Here on the bottom, I have the client host name. If it's from the table, it gets populated with static host. The name of the rule in case I'm taking it from the table, so I can look it up later if I need. The IP address, the MAC address of the device, and how long ago the client requested the IP. Actually, no. That's how long ago would be 24 hours minus the time left on the lease, so you got it. Down here, if you need to refresh the list, you have it. An issue with this table is every time you do some DHCP setup changes, this list goes blank until the lease time expires and the client requests the IP again. Moving on, we have a router advertisement. And that's only for IPv6. So once I figure out my IPv6 situation with my provider, I'm gonna get back here and run through it to you. Next, we have system management. Very interesting feature, dual WAN. What you can do is the standard SmartLink backup. So you can, if you have two providers, I had for a while 3G backup, you can choose which one is the primary, and in case primary goes down and then comes back up, how long until you go from backup to primary. Or load balance. Load balance just routes the traffic through both interfaces. Here you can choose the configuration of the interfaces that basically reflects bandwidth. Reflects bandwidth, that doesn't make any sense. Well, for the load balancing to work well, you mark the upstream and downstream of your connection. Here I run some tests and that's what I get. You can choose what is the test that certifies a connection as being active or not. So here what I do is I try Google DNS server, and if it fails 5 times, then it will just go to disable the connection, fail it over, and mark a log entry. So it puts the interface down. You can keep the interface up and generate just an error in the log. You can choose how it behaves. Doesn't work because there is no backup WAN. If you go to the second one, that's what I had on 3G. Bandwidth management is very important for our project. Carefully managing the bandwidth is essential for us to be able to still enjoy YouTube or browse the internet easily and quickly and run all the services we want to run on top of our connection. And that's where we set it up. The first step is to but enter how much bandwidth your provider is giving you. I'm using only WAN 1, and that's, I can measure up to 2200, so I put 2100 just to have some range for maneuver, and downstream the same. Down here you can choose the type of management, if it's priority or rate control. I'm using rate control, and I'm going to show you priority later on. To enter a new rule, you just choose the interface, what kind of service it is going to be, and then you enter the IP of the device or the range and the direction that you want to restrict. Important to mind that the sum of all minimum rates of the devices you're adding here cannot exceed the maximum available bandwidth. If it does, the router will complain and not let you add anything. But the maximum rate can be oversubscribed. I'll show what I mean. For example, here now I'm ensuring that my web server, I think that's my web server, I don't even remember, but I'm ensuring that this host here has always at least 256 kilobits of bandwidth and up to 512. Again, I don't want it to take more to not saturate all my bandwidth, and for example, I cannot Skype with my family. Same down here, yes, so it can download up to 5 megs per second. But it has a guarantee of 1 meg, so whenever someone is sending files to the server, the performance is going to be okay. This is my Windows server, the host, the Hyper-V host. And I really don't need it to use much upstream bandwidth because it's not running anything directly on it. And I'm actually not even restricting the download here, because the only times I use download on it is to just run Windows Update. Then, well, I don't remember what I was doing here anymore. I know this was my flatmate, I can remove this. I would not let her use more than 1 meg, and I gave her no minimum guarantee, only 1 kilobit per second, because she was really eating it all when always Skyping and etc. and torrenting. I'm going to clean it up, but that's basically the logic. And we are going to do a clean table during our project. Going back up, if you choose priority, then you can choose the kind of services that you can choose how important a service is, and then the router just organizes the traffic. I really didn't like how it works, and it doesn't offer me enough granularity. And also sometimes traffic is encrypted and the router doesn't know what it is. So I really go for very granular control per host. SNMP. I'm not using SNMP at the moment, but it's a very interesting feature and I'm going to enable it in the future. Basically here you can send SNMP traps to a host, and then you can use the traps for alerting, for monitoring, and etc. They are very interesting SNMP clients for iOS, for example, or free open source web interfaces that you can access on a Linux server. From that, you can set up alerts if bandwidth is overutilized, if some interface is down, etc., etc. Discovery Bonjour. I think the only thing it does is, if you enable this, when you go to my computer on Windows and go to the list of network devices, it's gonna show there your router. But I'm not even sure it does anything else. Let's check the help. Yeah, I remember, I think it was flooding my G5 system log with messages or broken messages with this MDNS responder service. I don't remember, I will need to check it out. But I have nothing to do with it, so I kept it disabled. Diagnostic. Diagnostic is just a tool that allows you to do name lookups and pings. It does what it says. You should ping google.com, then you ping google.com. Factor default, if you click here, you lose all your settings. In firmware upgrade, I'm gonna go through that later carefully, still today. But once you download the firmware from Cisco, you can click here and upload it. And if you click this button down here, it will forward you to the Cisco webpage. In restart, you basically restart the router. Doesn't do anything else. Backup and restore allows you to take a backup of the configuration, save it somewhere safe, in case your router breaks and you get a new one, for example. I've had the second WAN port or the first WAN port of one of my routers fail. I'm gonna talk about it at another time. Down here, you can make a backup of the configuration of the startup or the mirror. And here you can flip mirror and startup. For example, I'm gonna do some configuration changes now. I take a backup of the startup configuration, then I copy the startup configuration to the mirror. So when I do changes, I'm changing the startup configuration, and if anything fails, but the router is still reachable, I can copy mirror to startup and undo my changes. And of course, if I do a bigger mess, I can upload file or restore the factory settings and then upload the settings from the file. Next, we have port management. And here, the first screen is port setup. Very basic. You can disable ports, set the priority, and if you need to manually configure a port in case you have a faulty device, for example, you can disable auto negotiation and choose speed and etc. The RV042 can be split in VLANs. So, for example, you can have each port in a different VLAN, and they will all share the features of the router: internet connection, firewall, and then VPN tunnels, but they will not be able to talk to each other internally. Port status, it shows what we saw on the top for the WAN port, so you can see how much traffic has passed through here each port. If you go to firewall, you can enable and disable firewall in general, enable SPI. I don't know how advanced it is, but it should in theory inspect the contents of packets and based on certain characteristics identify attacks. It should be able also to survive denial of service attacks. Enabling block one request will basically reject anything that's coming from the WAN not matching any rules. So that's so. Let's see. Yeah, it protects against SIM flooding, Smurf, LAN, ping of death, IP spoofing, and reassembly attacks. A few of these things I have enabled on the Cisco and also on the internal firewall I run in a virtual machine that receives external traffic. And the WAN request drops an accepted TCP request and ICMP packets from the WAN side. ICMP is basically ping. So if I ping it, it's gonna time out. And remote management, as we saw in the summary screen, if you enable it, you can log into this web interface from the WAN side, and it's a really massive, huge security hole. HTTPS, you can log into this interface only via HTTPS if you enable this. I was having issues with something and I had to disable it, but you should keep it enabled. Multicast pass-through. Let's see. Aha, okay. So basically it allows IP multicast packets to forward to appropriate LAN devices. So if anything has to discover a service in LAN, it will probably fire if this is disabled, if I understand right. If I don't, please leave a comment. I don't own all the universe, the knowledge of the universe. Down here, you can block features. Based on the packet inspection that is enabled on the top, you can block Java, you can block any cookies, you can block ActiveX, that it should be dead already. And you can block access to proxy servers. The only thing I enable here is access to proxy servers. So actually enabling here, I disable access to proxy servers. And here you can have exceptions, I think. Yes. So you enable, you can allow domains to bypass the block. The next screen is access rules. Here you can choose, based on some priority, what services are allowed to go through the firewall. Something weird here you should be careful about is that apparently, if you enabled forwarding, there are no firewall rules applied. The port is always opened no matter what you do here, and no matter whether the port is blocked here on the firewall or not. This is something I really need to investigate and get back to you, but be aware when you're running the configuration. Basically, for example, here I'm running a civilization server, and if I go here, I can log or not log packets matching the rules, so I can see later on who is accessing my server, and I can choose IPs that can access it, and the destination is only the host I want, but it could be the whole network or a range. Interesting, here you can choose a window for accessing a specific services. So for example, if you open SSH on port 2082 to manage your devices, for your workplace you can use, for example, only your workspace IP, and you can enable the rule only during work hours and work days. So you can at the time connect to your home, but when you don't need it, it's disabled. Here in content filter, the next screen, you can block specific domains. And here you can block website based on keywords as well. It's not going to work, for example, Google on HTTPS, but in general, if a web page is open, you can enter a keyword and block it. If you have kids, it can be useful, but as internet moves from HTTP to HTTPS for the majority of the traffic, that will become quite useless. For example, you could schedule here that when your kids go to bed, then nothing will work. So you know they're sleeping and not using the internet. Yeah, I'm going to enable Facebook here just to piss my friends off. Next is VPN, and I'm going to skip that for now. We're going to have a special episode about it. Next we have log. So here on the first line we can choose a syslog server, and actually this server is not running, so I can actually disable it for now. And down here you can set up an email alert for, in case of issues, the router can tell you about it. In my configuration, I run my own email server in my network that sends unsigned emails via open connection to my Gmail account. So I had to allow it on Gmail because it kept being flagged as spam. But if you want, you can really enter the credentials of your real email server and have the router using your own email account. It's your call. Here down you can choose how many entries or how many minutes between emails. So for example, every 100 entries you get an email, or every 10 hours, whatever comes first. And down here you can see what kind of things gets logged. If you go to system log, what do we have? Yeah, so all the traffic that goes between WAN and LANs getting flagged, including traffic from my tunnels. So for example here, 40 and 50. 50 should be my grandparents' place and 40 is my own. So here you see the mark port, incoming port and destination port, for example, and it goes on PPP01. Here the traffic going the other way around on Ethernet 0 in the router, for example. Scroll down, you have a TCP here from an external IP on 443 to my web server. Actually not, that is my proxy. And then from the proxy it gets forwarded internally to the destination server. Let's see, system log. System log with wrong timestamps. You can see it connecting PPPoE to the provider and etc. And I need to hide this IP here. Access log is the one that we were seeing before. Firewall log, same thing. Here we have a policy violation, and that's actually traffic from inside to outside. Interesting. VPN log. VPN log shows the status of the tunnels. And I need to also filter the IPs. Sorry about that. Next we have system statistics. It's again another summary of how the interfaces are looking like. No big deal. And wizard runs the basic setup wizard and access rule setup wizard that you can use to manage the security and the configuration of your router. And that's something that we are definitely not gonna use for this project. And that's, my friends, how the RV042 interface looks like. Nowadays I'll not pick up this device, but I'm really happy with it and it has been really reliable for maybe 3 or 4 years already with me.